Love doesn't pay bills, Daniel. I'm tired of struggling with you. Daniel stood in front of the small, cracked mirror inside his apartment, adjusting the collar of the only good shirt he owned. The shirt wasn't new anymore. The sleeves had faded slightly, and one of the buttons had been replaced with a different color months ago after it snapped during work. Still, he tried to make himself look presentable. Tonight mattered. Or at least he desperately wanted it to matter. The tiny apartment behind him was quiet, except for the soft humming of an old standing fan struggling against the heat. A pile of unpaid bills sat on the small table near the kitchen. Electricity bill, rent notice, loan reminder. Daniel looked at them briefly before turning away. He didn't want tonight to be about struggle. Not again. His phone vibrated. Vanessa. He smiled immediately and answered. Hey, he said warmly. Her voice sounded distracted. Are you close yet? Almost ready, Daniel replied. I just need to book a ride. You're not taking a bus, right? She asked quickly. Daniel hesitated. No. Good, she replied. Please don't embarrass me tonight. The sentence stung more than she probably realized. Or maybe she realized exactly what she was doing. Daniel forced a small laugh anyway. You look beautiful already, and I haven't even seen you yet. Vanessa didn't respond to that. Just hurry, she said before hanging up. The room became silent again. Daniel stared at the dark screen of his phone for a few seconds, then slowly slipped it into his pocket. His eyes moved toward the envelope hidden underneath a notebook on the table. Inside was money. The last money he had left after paying part of Vanessa's mother's hospital treatment 2 days earlier. Vanessa didn't even know. He never told her. Because every time he tried talking about his sacrifices lately, she looked exhausted. Like she was tired of hearing struggle. Daniel grabbed the envelope anyway. Tonight was supposed to fix things. Or at least that's what he kept telling himself. 30 minutes later, Daniel stepped out of the taxi in front of one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Luxury cars lined the entrance. People dressed in designer clothing moved through the glass doors, laughing loudly. Daniel instantly felt underdressed, underqualified, out of place. He checked his phone balance quickly and swallowed hard. After tonight's dinner, he honestly had no idea how he would survive the rest of the week. But Vanessa was already standing near the entrance, scrolling through her phone impatiently. The moment Daniel saw her, he smiled automatically. Vanessa looked stunning. Elegant black dress, silver jewelry, perfect makeup. The kind of beauty that made people stare when she entered a room. Daniel walked toward her carefully. Wow, he said softly. You look amazing. Vanessa finally looked up. Her eyes quickly scanned his clothes. Not lovingly, critically. You wore that shirt? She asked. Daniel's smile faded slightly. It's my best one, Vanessa sighed quietly. You could have at least ironed it better. Daniel looked down awkwardly. I rushed out. Without another word, Vanessa turned and walked toward the restaurant entrance. Daniel followed silently behind her. The restaurant was beautiful inside. Soft golden lights, live piano music, crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Every table looked expensive. Daniel suddenly became very aware of how loudly his cheap shoes tapped against the polished floor. The hostess escorted them to a table near the center of the restaurant. Daniel noticed several people glance toward them, mostly toward Vanessa. She sat down and immediately picked up the menu. Her expression changed instantly. This place is expensive, Daniel whispered carefully. Vanessa didn't even look up. That's the point. Daniel opened the menu slowly. His chest tightened immediately. The cheapest meal there was more than what he usually spent in 3 days. Still, he forced himself to stay calm. A waiter approached the table politely. Good evening, sir. Would you like to start with wine? Daniel hesitated. Before he could answer, Vanessa spoke. Yes, the red one. The waiter nodded and left. Daniel lowered his voice. Vanessa, what? The wine alone is expensive. She leaned back in her chair slowly. And Daniel swallowed. I just think maybe we should keep things simple tonight. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Simple? People at a nearby table laughed loudly, but Daniel still felt exposed somehow. Daniel, Vanessa said quietly, do you know how exhausting it is, constantly pretending everything is okay? Daniel frowned slightly. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. The waiter returned with wine glasses. Vanessa took hers immediately. Daniel barely touched his. She stared at him for a few seconds before shaking her head. My friends were right. Daniel's stomach tightened. What did they say? Vanessa laughed bitterly. They said I'm wasting my life. Daniel looked hurt immediately. Vanessa. No, seriously, she continued. Do you know what it feels like hearing other women talk about vacations, investments, luxury apartments, while I'm dating someone who still struggles to pay basic bills? Daniel's face burned with embarrassment. A couple sitting nearby glanced toward them briefly. He lowered his voice. I told you I'm trying to grow the business. Trying, Vanessa repeated coldly. Everything with you is always trying. Daniel leaned forward. You knew my situation from the beginning. And I believed in you from the beginning, she snapped. But belief doesn't pay rent. Daniel fell silent. Vanessa continued drinking slowly. You know what the problem is? She asked quietly. Daniel said nothing. You're comfortable struggling. That's not true. Really, she shot back immediately. Because every year it's the same thing. Same apartment, same excuses, same promises. Daniel's jaw tightened. I've been working every single day. And what do you have to show for it? The question landed heavily between them. Daniel opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. Because honestly, nothing, at least nothing visible. Vanessa leaned closer. I'm tired, Daniel. Her voice sounded calmer now, more dangerous. I'm tired of defending you. Daniel stared at her quietly. What does that mean? It means love isn't enough. Daniel's chest tightened painfully. Vanessa. No, she interrupted sharply. Let's stop pretending. Love doesn't pay bills. The sentence cut through him completely. Even the waiter approaching their table awkwardly slowed down after hearing it. Daniel looked down at the table, humiliated. Small, broken in front of strangers. I gave you my best, he said quietly. Vanessa laughed softly. Your best isn't enough. Silence. Heavy silence. Then finally, she picked up her purse. Daniel looked confused immediately. What are you doing? Vanessa stood up slowly. I'm leaving. Daniel blinked in disbelief. What? I met someone else. The words emptied the air from his lungs. No, he's stable. Successful. She shrugged lightly. Everything you're not. Daniel looked completely shattered now. After 3 years, Vanessa's expression hardened. I can't destroy my future waiting for your potential. Daniel stared at her helplessly. Vanessa, please. But she was already turning away. Then suddenly she stopped near the restaurant entrance. A tall man in an expensive navy blue suit walked toward her confidently. Luxury watch. Car keys spinning around his finger. Perfect smile. The man wrapped an arm around Vanessa's waist naturally. Like Daniel had already been replaced long ago. Daniel sat frozen at the table watching them together. Vanessa looked back one final time and delivered the final blow. I would rather be alone than spend another year dating a broke man. Then she walked out with the other man, leaving Daniel sitting alone in the middle of the restaurant, while strangers pretended not to stare at his humiliation. Daniel remained seated long after Vanessa left the restaurant. The untouched food on the table had already gone cold. Around him, conversations slowly returned to normal as people lost interest in his humiliation. But Daniel couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't even properly breathe. The sentence kept replaying inside his head over and over again. Love doesn't pay bills. Then another one. Your best isn't enough. Daniel slowly rubbed his hands together beneath the table, trying to calm the shaking in his fingers. The waiter approached carefully. Sir, would you like me to package the food? Daniel stared blankly at the table before finally shaking his head. No. The waiter hesitated awkwardly, then gently placed the bill on the table. Daniel looked down at the amount and felt his stomach tighten immediately. It was worse than he expected. For a few painful seconds, he simply stared at the paper, then quietly reached for the envelope containing the last money he had left. The money he had planned to survive on for the rest of the week. The money he probably needed more than anyone. But tonight had already stripped him of enough dignity. He refused to let the restaurant remove the little pride he still had left. Daniel paid the bill slowly, then stood up and walked toward the exit alone. Outside, rain had already started falling lightly across the city. Luxury cars pulled away from the restaurant entrance one after another. Daniel looked around briefly. Vanessa and the man were already gone. Of course they were. He laughed bitterly to himself before starting the long walk home under the rain. By the time Daniel reached his apartment, his clothes were soaked completely. The lights inside the building hallway flickered weakly as he climbed the stairs slowly. Everything suddenly felt heavier, his body, his thoughts, his future. The moment he entered his apartment, silence swallowed him immediately. No messages from Vanessa, no apology, nothing. Daniel dropped his keys onto the table and sat down heavily on the edge of his bed. Then finally, he broke. The pain hit him all at once. 3 years of sacrifices. 3 years of believing things would eventually become better. Gone in one night. Daniel covered his face with both hands as tears slipped through his fingers quietly. Not loud crying, not dramatic screaming, just silent heartbreak, the kind that empties a person slowly from the inside. His phone vibrated suddenly, Unknown number. Daniel ignored it. A few seconds later, it rang again. Frustrated, he answered. Hello, Daniel, an older male voice spoke. Daniel frowned slightly. Yes, this is Mr. Bennett. Daniel sat upright immediately. Mr. Bennett, one of the investors who had rejected Daniel's business proposal months earlier. Sir, I reviewed your transportation software again tonight, the older man said calmly. I think I may have made a mistake rejecting you. Daniel blinked slowly. What? I want to meet tomorrow morning. Daniel looked around his tiny apartment in disbelief. Tomorrow morning? After everything that happened tonight? Mr. Bennett continued. Can you come to my office by 9? Daniel hesitated. Yes, of course. Good, the man replied before hanging up. The apartment became silent again. Daniel stared at his phone for several seconds, then slowly looked toward the old laptop sitting on the small desk near the window. The same laptop he had spent countless sleepless nights working on. The same dream Vanessa had mocked repeatedly. Daniel stood up slowly and walked toward it. On the screen was the unfinished transportation app he had been building for almost 2 years, RideSync, a smart transportation platform designed to help independent drivers find better-paying clients without exploitative company commissions. Daniel stared at the logo quietly, then suddenly remembered Vanessa laughing earlier. You're dreaming. For the first time that night, something inside him changed. Not completely, but enough. Enough to hurt differently. Enough to stop begging life for mercy. Daniel opened the laptop fully and sat down. Outside, rain continued hitting the windows softly as the city slept. But inside that tiny apartment, Daniel worked until sunrise. The next morning, Daniel arrived at Bennett Holdings, wearing the same shirt from the night before. Only this time it was neatly ironed. He looked exhausted, but focused. The company building towered above him like another world entirely. Employees dressed in expensive suits moved confidently through the lobby, while Daniel stood there gripping his laptop bag tightly. For a brief moment, insecurity returned. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe he truly didn't belong in spaces like this. Then the receptionist smiled politely. Mr. Bennett is expecting you. Daniel nodded quietly and followed her toward the elevators. Inside the elevator, he stared at his reflection in the mirror walls. Tired eyes, worn clothes, but determination. Real determination. The elevator doors opened slowly onto the top floor. And for the next 2 hours, Daniel presented the idea he had spent years building. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but passionately. Mr. Bennett listened carefully the entire time. No interruptions, no mockery, no pity. When Daniel finally finished speaking, the older man leaned back quietly in his chair, then smiled slightly. You remind me of myself 30 years ago. Daniel swallowed nervously. Mr. Bennett stood up and walked toward the giant office window overlooking the city. Most people chase quick money, he said calmly. But people who survive long-term usually build solutions. Daniel remained silent. Then Mr. Bennett turned around. How much do you need to start properly? Daniel froze. Sir? You heard me. Daniel could barely process what was happening. Nobody had believed in him for years. Nobody. Not even Vanessa anymore. His voice almost cracked as he answered quietly. 200,000, Mr. Bennett nodded once. You'll have it by next week. Daniel's eyes widened instantly. What? But, the older man added calmly, if I invest in you, Daniel, you do not quit halfway. Understood? Daniel nodded immediately. Yes, sir. No distractions, no emotional weakness, no excuses. Daniel thought briefly about Vanessa, about the restaurant, about the humiliation, then slowly nodded again. I understand. Mr. Bennett extended his hand. Daniel stared at it for a second before shaking it firmly. And in that exact moment, his life quietly began changing forever. 3 years later, the city looked completely different from the one Daniel used to walk through hopelessly at night. Or maybe Daniel was the one who had changed. A sleek black SUV moved smoothly through downtown traffic before stopping in front of a towering glass building with giant silver letters displayed across the entrance. RideSync Global. Employees hurried in and out of the building carrying laptops and documents, while reporters stood near the entrance discussing the company's latest expansion deal. Inside the vehicle, Daniel adjusted the cuff of his dark suit calmly. Gone was the exhausted man who once counted coins to pay restaurant bills. Everything about him had changed now. The confidence, the posture, the silence in his eyes. Success had refined him quietly, not loudly, not arrogantly, but powerfully. His driver turned slightly. Sir, the board members are already waiting upstairs. Daniel nodded once. I'll be there in a minute. The driver stepped out first and opened the door carefully. The moment Daniel stepped onto the sidewalk, several employees immediately greeted him respectfully. Good morning, Mr. Cole. Morning, sir. Daniel acknowledged them politely before entering the building lobby. The giant screen hanging above the reception desk displayed RideSync's newest international partnership announcement. People moved around him quickly, phones ringing, elevators opening and closing, business conversations happening everywhere. 3 years ago, Daniel would have looked at this world and believed he didn't belong in it. Now he owned it. Meanwhile, across town, Vanessa sat quietly inside a crowded apartment staring at unpaid bills spread across the table. Life had not unfolded the way she imagined, not even close. The successful man she left Daniel for had disappeared less than a year into their relationship, after losing most of his money through gambling and failed investments. The luxury lifestyle vanished almost overnight. So did the expensive gifts, the vacations, the promises. Now Vanessa worked exhausting shifts at a clothing store just to survive, and even that barely covered rent. Her phone vibrated suddenly. Her friend Melissa, Vanessa answered tiredly. Hey, Vanessa, did you hear? Melissa asked excitedly. Hear what? RideSync Global is hiring. Vanessa frowned slightly. That transportation company? Yes. Apparently they're expanding again and paying really well. Vanessa rubbed her forehead tiredly. I don't even think they'd hire someone like me. Just apply, Melissa insisted. What do you have to lose? Vanessa remained quiet for a moment. Honestly, nothing. Absolutely nothing. Fine, she sighed. Send me the details. The next morning, Vanessa stood nervously in front of RideSync Global headquarters holding her resume tightly. The building was massive, elegant, powerful. People dressed professionally moved confidently through the revolving doors, while luxury vehicles dropped executives off at the entrance. Vanessa looked down at her clothes self-consciously. For the first time in years, she felt small. The receptionist smiled politely as Vanessa approached the desk. Good morning. Do you have an interview appointment? Yes, Vanessa replied quickly. Marketing department. The receptionist checked the system briefly before nodding. 23rd floor. Vanessa thanked her quietly before walking toward the elevators. As the elevator doors closed, she glanced around nervously at the other applicants standing beside her. Everyone looked confident, successful, prepared. Vanessa suddenly felt completely out of place. The elevator opened slowly onto the 23rd floor. Modern glass offices stretched across the massive space, while employees moved quickly between meeting rooms. Vanessa followed another assistant toward the waiting area, but halfway there, she suddenly stopped walking. Completely. Her eyes locked onto a massive portrait hanging on the far wall, and the world around her seemed to disappear instantly. No, no way. Vanessa stared at the portrait in disbelief. Her breathing became uneven, because standing in the photograph wearing an expensive black suit was Daniel, smiling confidently beside the RideSync Global logo. Underneath the portrait were words written boldly in silver letters. Daniel Cole, founder and CEO. Vanessa's knees almost gave out beneath her. Her heart pounded violently inside her chest. No, she whispered weakly. The assistant looked confused. Mom? Vanessa couldn't answer. 3 years. 3 years since she walked out of that restaurant, believing Daniel would never become anything. 3 years since she called him broke. 3 years since she laughed at his dreams. And now, his company towered over the entire city. Vanessa stared at the portrait in complete shock as memories flooded violently through her mind. Love doesn't pay bills. I would rather be alone than spend another year dating a broke man. The humiliation, the cruelty, the arrogance. Every word suddenly came back to destroy her all over again. Then suddenly, employees nearby straightened immediately. The atmosphere changed instantly. Vanessa frowned slightly. Footsteps approached from behind her calmly, confidently. The assistant quickly lowered her voice. Good morning, sir. Vanessa slowly turned around and froze. Daniel stood only a few feet away wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. Expensive watch, sharp posture, controlled expression. But the eyes were exactly the same. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Vanessa's lips parted slightly in disbelief. Daniel. But his expression never changed. Not anger, not bitterness, not even satisfaction, just calm silence. The kind of silence power creates. Then finally, Daniel looked at the assistant beside her. Is there a problem here? The assistant shook her head immediately. No, sir. Daniel nodded once before his eyes briefly returned to Vanessa. And for the first time since seeing her again, a faint emotion crossed his face. Recognition. Then he spoke calmly. Miss Vanessa. The way he said her name hurt more than shouting ever could. Cold, professional, distant. Like the woman who once shattered him had become a complete stranger. Vanessa could barely breathe. You own this company? Daniel adjusted his watch casually. Yes. Silence crushed the space between them. Then his assistant approached quickly. Sir, the board meeting is ready. Daniel nodded once. Without looking away from Vanessa completely, he spoke calmly. Please make sure she's comfortable while waiting. Then he turned and walked away toward the executive conference room, leaving Vanessa standing there completely frozen beneath the giant portrait of the man she once abandoned for being poor.